Hello, and welcome to Politics for the People. I'm your host, Michael Striano. Thanks for listening and joining in the conversation. You can find links to our Patreon and Instagram in the show notes and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts to help others find the show. Okay, let's get to it. This week, we're going to take a closer look at the executive branch, specifically the cabinet. It's a word you're probably hearing again as the incoming Biden administration has begun naming nominees. But do you know what the cabinet is? If you do, are you familiar with all 15 positions? We'll take a look at what the cabinet does, some of the positions, and where it came from. Let's start, as always, with a definition. The cabinet is a group of the president's top advisors and the vice president. These advisors are the heads of the various departments within the executive branch of our government. While they serve a formal role, it's important to note their role is only loosely defined by the Constitution. In fact, their only mention in the Constitution is incredibly brief, half a sentence between naming the president commander-in-chief and giving the power to grant pardons. The body isn't even given a title. Instead, the clause simply states that the president has the power to demand the opinions of the department heads in writing, as pertains to their specific field. That's it. The cabinet as we know it today is actually the creation of George Washington. Much of the United States federal government is based on precedent. All three branches rely heavily on the idea of precedent, with the Supreme Court deciding cases citing the idea over their personally held beliefs, Congress appointing officers to oversee the idea, and the president relying on it to give some semblance of scope and guidance to an otherwise impossibly vague job. Following the adoption of our Constitution, Washington obviously had no precedent to follow, and faced these problems on his own. Working very much without a safety net, Washington sought whatever options and input he could find from those around him he deemed intelligent and influential. This led our first president to formalize his relationship with his departmental heads in a very specific way. He saw them as a group of advisors who were experts in their fields, capable of providing insight at a moment's notice. In the early days of our country, Congress wasn't in session often, and with a large country and slow transportation, it was nearly impossible to assemble them when not in session. Washington knew he was setting the precedents that would be followed by his successors, and feared any one person, even himself, having too much power. Unable to assemble the elected congressional delegations when he needed advisors and ideas, the president instead turned to his cabinet. He began holding regular meetings with the department heads, not only to stay updated on what was going on around the country, but to consult with them to make sure his governing solutions were in the best interest of the country. The cabinet meetings became a sort of intellectual sparring ground. Questions were issued by the president in advance and served as agendas as different secretaries argued their answers to help Washington arrive at the best conclusion. These debates have been immortalized in the musical Hamilton, as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were well known for their contentious debates as members of Washington's cabinet. Washington defined a major aspect of the presidency as delegating day-to-day responsibilities to the individual states until a crisis necessitated swift, coordinated federal action. In such times, the president would call upon their cabinet to provide focused, expert insight to guide their decision-making. Now that we've covered some of the cabinet's history, let's look at the cabinet as it exists today. Washington's cabinet contained only 5 departments. Today, that number has expanded to 15. Let's list them out to see which we're familiar with and which are still very foreign to us. In order of succession, they are Secretaries of State, Treasury, and Defense, the Attorney General, Secretaries of Interior, Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security. You're probably familiar with some of these, The Secretary of State handles foreign affairs, Defense protects the United States from attacks, and the Attorney General runs the Justice Department as the head of law enforcement in the country. But there are some lesser known, such as Interior, Health and Human Services, and Energy. Let's run through a couple of the lesser known departments and give an overview of their functions. Interior handles the actual land of the country, so it oversees the National Park Service and is charged with protecting natural resources. It is also the executive branch department responsible for Indigenous peoples' affairs and education, although it still refers to these people as Indians. If you're interested in how the country and the federal government interacts with the land, sea, and sky, check out the Department of the Interior. Housing and urban development is largely spelled out by its name. It helps people, especially with lower incomes, find housing and oversees plans to create additional low-income housing. It also works to prevent biases and discrimination in housing, and seeks to ensure fair lending regardless of race, color, ethnicity, ability, age, or any other basis for a claim. They also have a variety of programs to help homeowners avoid foreclosure. So during a crisis and recession like we're experiencing this year, HUD, as it's known, can provide important services. If you're struggling, as many are, reach out to HUD and see if there's a program that can assist. The Department of Energy does what it sounds like, oversees various energy resources, such as oil, coal, natural gas, and nuclear, as well as investigating more sustainable and renewable solutions like solar and wind. But there is another very important component most people are surprised to learn about. Since its roots in the Manhattan Project, the DOE has overseen issues of nuclear technologies, including weaponry. In fact, the department's website lists its responsibilities as, quote, maintaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent and reducing the threat of nuclear proliferation, end quote, before mentioning the U.S. energy supply. They also provide STEM resources to students, teachers, and workers, as well as information about new technologies such as vehicles, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. Between their own responsibilities and those they share with other departments, the Department of Energy is an important one to understand, and we encourage you to look at it on your own. Health and Human Services is another department that, similar to HUD, seems to have its description in its name. The HHS website lists their mission as to enhance health and well-being of all Americans by providing for effective health and human services and by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences underlying medicine, public health, and social services. One thing to note here is the wording, providing for effective health and human services. Means they provide the opportunity for those services, not the services themselves. They provide references and information for various programs, grants, and protections, but a lot of the information on the website is very out of date. Even though more recent data is available, you have to go looking for it. For example, one of the easier pieces of information to find is the National Poverty Report. But the one listed is from 2015. If you dig, you can find 2016 through 2020, but the information is difficult to find for some reason. HHS oversees things like the healthcare marketplace established by the Affordable Care Act, which is the first link available on the website, as well as support programs for children like SNAP, the School Nutrition Assistance Program, and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. That's a very brief overview of just a couple of the departments represented in the cabinet. But it's clear they're not always what you think at first glance, so it's worth taking the time for yourself to learn what they do. These aren't elected representatives, they're political appointees who are approved by the Senate. The president, or president-elect in the case of a new incoming administration, nominates a cabinet to lead each department. The appropriate Senate committees hold hearings with the nominees to learn more about them, and issue a recommendation to the full Senate. Additional hearings are held as needed, culminating in a vote by the full Senate to confirm or reject the nominee. Normally, this is not a particularly contentious process. The reality is, for all the attention given to cabinet appointees, their own views are secondary to those of the president. Department secretaries serve as an indication of how the president would like to steer those policies. But the executive branch is led by the president, with everyone else serving as an advisor. Now, while cabinet appointees have no governing power, they do have jurisdiction over their departments, and day-to-day operations are delegated to them. It's important to know who they are and how they think, but those choices are largely representative of the president themselves. There usually aren't any surprises, as the cabinet tends to align with promises and priorities laid out by the occupant of the Oval Office. We only covered a few of the departments very briefly in this episode, but we hope we've inspired you to do a Google search, check out their website, and really learn what they do for yourself. These are people making decisions that have an impact on your daily life, from your child's school to the roads or trains you take to work every day. Even the food and water we consume every day. Take a minute and see who's in charge, and whether you agree or disagree with their ideals. Your only say in whether or not they're confirmed is by learning about them and calling your senator to tell them you support or reject the candidate. Make your voice heard, even though the election is over. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to our patrons on Patreon for your help in making this happen, and all those who have left us a review. Be sure to check out the show notes, where you can sign up for our weekly newsletter and follow us on Instagram at Politics for the People Podcast. Want to help shape the conversation, have a say in episode topics, and get exclusive content, including early access to episodes and live conversations with me? Check the show notes, head on over to our Patreon page, and subscribe for as little as $3. We'll see you Wednesday with our newsletter, and Friday with a brand new episode. Take care.